Oh, I didn't see you there. Gosh, I didn't even get a chance to clean the place up first. We'll have a nice Pepsi. I wasn't expecting visitors, but I've got a really good story, and I'm thinking you should stay and hear it. This story is the story of Mexico. But in order for you to really understand the story, I gotta tell you about Mexico first. So up until 1812, Mexico was controlled by Spain. See, Spain had this plan to send a bunch of missionaries into the Mexico territory to convert these people to the country's religion of Catholicism, or being Catholic. The Christian church is divided into two major parts, Catholic and Protestant, due to the Protestant Reformation. The missionaries would build these small mission towns kind of in strategic places throughout the country so that they would have a place to sleep and eat and that they would be protected from any natives. In the 1800s, Spain kind of started to realize that this wasn't going to work, and then Mexico decides to fight for their independence, and they ended up winning. Mexico gained its independence, and when it did, it looked like this. But now, it looks like this. So, what happened to Mexico? Let's find out. So, Mexico's its own country, and it has a ton of land. It had more land really than it knew what to do with. And Mexico knew that they could make a lot of money if they got people farming and living on their land. So Mexico offers these huge land grants for people to settle in the northeastern part of Mexico, which was known as Tejas, or modern-day Texas. Mexico is going to make a string of really bad decisions, and this is the first one. Mexico offered these land grants to Mexicans and Americans, and it was really, really popular. The Mexicans who settled in Tejas, or Texas, were called Tejanos, and the Americans that settled there were called Texans. This plan worked so well for Mexico that eventually the American Texans outnumbered the Mexican Tejanos. There's a point where American settlers that are so eager to expand west flood into Texas. The opportunity to make money owning a piece of land in Texas was huge, and the Americans knew it. Towns would have these giant posters that say, "Go to Texas." People would leave for Texas and they would carve into their door GTT, which meant gone to Texas. And by 1835, there were 1,000 Americans entering Texas per month. Every month, 1,000 Americans. So at first, Mexico's so excited to have all these Americans on their land, right? But there started to be like a lot of Americans on their land. Some may say too many Americans on their land. Tensions began to rise as Mexico started to regret their hospitality. See, there's a few reasons. With Americans came slaves, and at this point, everyone else in the world really is done with slavery. Mexico used to take natives and use them as slaves, but at this point, slavery has been completely banned. America is really the only country that's still using slaves, and it's definitely the only country that's using slaves to this extent. Slavery is completely illegal in Mexico, but Mexico really lacked the troops to kind of patrol the border and to enforce these laws, so there's really nothing that they can do about it. On top of that, I mentioned that Spain was Catholic, and a lot of these Mexicans were Catholic, and when Americans came to Mexico, they would say, "Hey, you can have this land, you just have to sign this document saying that you'll be Catholic." And the Americans were like, "Sure," and they signed it. And then they gave it back to them, and they're like, "But I'm not Catholic." And what could the Mexican government do about it? Not a thing. Also, tensions are rising because in the early 1800s, Americans were like thirsty for some land, okay? Manifest destiny, the idea of going west and keep on going, had everyone in America wanting to expand, right? And the Texans, that were mostly Americans at this point, started to talk about taking Texas for themselves. And they didn't want just Texas, they wanted to take Texas from where it was all the way down to the Rio Grande, which is this giant, beautiful river that anyone would want to settle on. The Rio Grande is the place to be in Mexico. It's like if you're at the Rio Grande, you're it, okay? You are popping. So these Texans kind of start to culturally and physically separate themselves from Mexico. And they found that Mexico's laws to be really restrictive. And Mexico can't really do anything about it, and it's almost like they're getting really frustrated. So, a man named Stephen F. Austin, which the city of Austin is named after, was a very successful Texan who thought that, I'm just gonna travel to Mexico City, I'm gonna talk to the president, who is named Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, and I'm gonna convince him to work on an agreement that just gives Texas a little more freedom to govern themselves. Well, Santa Anna, who is going to make several really bad decisions here in this video, told the guy no, sent him on his way home. While the guy was walking home, he decided to suspend the Mexican Constitution, which basically means that he just lit the thing on fire and wiped his with it. Then, with the Constitution canceled, okay, and there's no constitution to tell him what he could or could not do, he has Austin arrested for inciting a revolution, which wasn't really what he was trying to do at all. And then the Texans, who were already mad about not having enough power, he just revokes almost all the power of the people in Texas, okay? This is widely regarded as a really bad decision, okay? So Santa Anna basically told everyone in Texas that Texas is stupid. And of course the Texans were like,
"Don't you dare take the name of Texas in vain!"
The Texans hear this and they straight up spaz out when they hear that all of their rights have been taken away. They're already mad at Mexico, and all of a sudden all these little rebellions happen, and then there's one which is the ever-famous Texas Revolution. As tensions rose between Texas and Mexico, Santa Anna marched 4,000 troops to the Alamo. Do you remember earlier in the video when I said the missionaries would build these small mission towns kind of in strategic places throughout the country so that they would have a place to sleep and eat and that they would be protected from any natives? See, these little towns are still there, and these Texans used the leftover towns as forts because they were strategically placed and they were fortified. The Texans are staying at this Alamo. All right, keep it going. The Texas troops drove the Mexican forces away, but Santa Anna retaliated by destroying a small American garrison at the Alamo. Santa Anna manages to kill 187 U.S. soldiers. He killed Jim Bowie, the inventor of the Bowie knife, and he killed Davy Crockett, most known for his raccoon hats. On a more serious note, only a few women and children were spared. Santa Anna really got the best of these Texans at the Alamo. Now there's this saying in Texas, which is "don't mess with Texas." This is a rule that Santa Anna wished that he had followed. So only 6 weeks after the Alamo, the Texans struck back, led by a guy named Sam Houston, which the city of Houston is named after. The Texans defeated Santa Anna at the Battle of San Jacinto. While they were fighting, they shouted the now famous war cry, "Remember the Alamo," which inspired the troops to fight hard to avenge their fallen Texans. So the Texans managed to kill 630 of Santa Anna's troops, and they captured Santa Anna, but this was a long and it was a really bloody fight. It lasted days and days and days and days. Oh wait, no it didn't. It took the Texans 18 minutes to defeat and capture Santa Anna. The Treaty of Velasco was signed on September 1836. Texas became its own country. Texas was not independent for long though. In 1838, just 2 years later, Houston, Texas guy, the Rocket, proposed that the U.S. annex or invite Texas to join the Union. This sounds like a home run, right? More land, further west, that's the dream, but of course it's America, so some people are for it and some people are against it. See, the North didn't want Texas to come in as a slave state. They thought that, well, if there's more slave states, then there's not going to be enough representation of free states in Congress. The South really wanted Texas to be this new, big, massive slave state that they could have. There was a lot of arguing as to whether or not Texas should be annexed, but either way, President James K. Polk adds Texas to the Union as a slave state on December 29th, 1845. So that's how America gets Texas. But the story does not end here. The move to bring Texas, which used to be Mexico's pride land, into the United States makes Mexico so mad you can smell the war brewing. Now the biggest thing is that the Rio Grande River is still about 100 miles away from the bottom of Texas, okay? America wants it. So the story of the Mexican-American War is honestly crazy, and I promise that none of this is made up, and you're just gonna have to believe me. Or you could look it up in like accredited primary source. But before I continue my story, I've gotta introduce you to our 11th president, James K. Polk. Okay, so James K. Polk, he really only wanted one thing and one thing only, and that's land. Polk would do anything to get his little red, white, and blue hands on some sweet, sweet American land, okay? And that's great. And that's great, because Polk does end up almost doubling the size of America. But that's not what's interesting. See, Polk would do just about anything to get the land. Some may say he would even start a war. You know, as a matter of fact, beyond that, Polk really wanted to start a war over land. It's almost like he went out of his way to make sure that people had to die so that he had to get land. I mean, Polk is all about it, okay? Even when there's like a peaceful option to get some land, like they're like, yeah, we'll sign this treaty. Polk's like, nah, like let's fight over it. Like, let's see what you got. Like, I'm not going down without a fight, you know? I'll give you an example. America and Great Britain both own Oregon, and they're trying to figure out what they want to do to it. Well, while that's happening, James K. Polk is running for president, and he gets people so fired up about America taking this land, he's talking about going to war with Britain. He's so passionate about it. Newspapers published this saying 54-40 or fight, which is where they wanted the boundary of Oregon to be. I mean, he's not even president, and he's getting people fired up to fight this war. And meanwhile, Britain's like, we don't really want it. You can have it. We definitely don't want to fight for it. 54-40 or fight. No. It's a very peaceful agreement, okay? The 49th parallel becomes the northern boundary of the United States. That's why the top of the United States is nice and straight. But what I'm trying to say is every time you turn around, Polk is like trying to get America's land in some war. He secured that northern border that I just talked about without having a war, even though he probably wanted one really bad. But the southern border with Mexico would not be so easy. And you can bet your that Polk is going to do everything he can to start this war. He just can't get enough war, people. Polk sets his feisty little eyes on California, New Mexico, and the Rio Grande. He wants to take Texas's border 100 miles north of the Rio Grande. He wants to bring it all the way down to the Rio Grande. He wants California, New Mexico, and the Rio Grande. He probably sat in the conference room and he's like in there with his cabinet and he's like, I have a great idea on how we can get California, New Mexico, and Texas down to the southern border of the Rio Grande. And his cabinet's like, please don't say start a war, please don't say start a war, please don't say start a war. We should start a war. So Polk, thirsty for bloodshed, doesn't want America to start the war. Don't get me wrong, he wants a war, but he wants Mexico to start it. Even though he wants the war, he knows that it'll be way easier to get Americans on board if they think Mexico is blindly coming into our country and is like attacking us. Everything I'm about to tell you from here on out is true, and it is crazy. Honestly, you gotta listen because this is gonna blow your mind. So he wants to get Mexico to start this war. Mexico doesn't want to go to war with us. They know they're gonna lose. But he wants Mexico to attack US troops on their own soil. So he puts troops right on the edge of the border just to piss Mexico off. Then, to piss him off even more, sends in these little explorers. Mexico eventually is just like, I've had enough, because America's doing like the equivalent of when your sister's in the car and she's like, I'm not touching you. I'm not touching you. That's happening to Mexico. So somewhere right on the border, Mexican troops come in and they kill 9 US soldiers. Polk comes back and says 9 US troops were killed on American soil. It's time for war. The crazy thing is that this was never truly confirmed. And even Abraham Lincoln, a man that's literally nicknamed Honest Abe, was like, I think this guy's full of shit. And whether he was full of shit or not, Polk's plan worked. He was able to get Congress to recognize a state of war with Mexico, and his thirst for bloodshed lives on. That's not even remotely the craziest part of this war. So Polk's first move is to get New Mexico. So he gets this guy named Stephen Kearny to march from Kansas all the way to Santa Fe, New Mexico, which was, quote, completely barren of all life. This was 800 miles of flat desert. So they're gonna go to Santa Fe and they're gonna fight the troops there and capture it. They make it to Santa Fe, ready to fight, and when they get there, instead of running into troops, they run into a group of upper-class Mexicans who wanted to join the American army. They got there and the Mexicans were like, hey, cool hats, let's link up. New Mexico was taken by American forces without a single shot being fired. Polk also wants California, and he's so eager to annoy Mexico that he offers to buy it in the middle of this war just to piss them off. American troops walk right into California. They take over the town of Sonoma. It's not difficult, and they raise the California flag on their newly acquired California. Okay, so America successfully takes New Mexico and California, which is some of the most valuable land in the entire world, like it was nothing. That's not even remotely the craziest part. America did end up fighting in Mexico for about a year, but they won every single battle soundly for that whole year. On top of that, the general of the actual army, his name was Winfield Scott, was nicknamed Old Rough and Ready because he wore a straw hat and a brown jacket to fight in. I mean, how disrespectful can you be to show up to this war as the general of the army in a straw hat? How disrespectful can you possibly be? He didn't give a about this war so bad, he just showed up in his regular ass clothes. But here comes the second most crazy part. Polk, this whole time, has been in contact with the former president of Mexico, Santa Anna, who has been in exile in Cuba this whole time. Santa Anna, the same president that got beaten in 18 minutes by American troops, is secretly talking to the president of the United States, and they make a secret plan together that Santa Anna comes back into Mexico, becomes the president again, and then he'll end the war. So Polk is like, sounds pretty good to me. So they actually sneak him back into Mexico, and obviously he turns on the Americans immediately. He tries to fight him, and the Americans just whoop his butt. America breezes through, I think, like 7 major battles in Mexico, and this is the most insane part. I cannot make this up. During one battle, a group of soldiers from Illinois, quote, surprised Santa Anna, and he ran away, leaving behind his prosthetic leg. His real leg got removed, and he has a fake wooden leg, and he got scared and ran away and left his leg behind. The troops from Illinois stole his leg, and they took the man's wooden leg. They brought it all the way the hell back to Illinois, where it still sits today. Santa Anna's prosthetic leg is just a quick trip to Springfield, Illinois. Literally, you can get into your car right now and drive to this guy's prosthetic leg. We just left his leg and we took it. And Mexico keeps asking for it back. We won't get it back. We're like, nah, it's our leg. I know that's silly, and I really do not mean to make light of war. So even though Mexico failed to make really any good decisions, America's quest for a Atlantic to Pacific, coast-to-coast country came at the expense of 25,000 Mexican lives. In America, we call this the Mexican-American War, but in Mexico, they call it the War of American Invasion. Because in reality, America invaded Mexico. They desired nothing more than to steal their land and leave nothing behind. The Mexican troops that did fight for Mexico fought valiantly, and they risked their lives for something they believed in. And had the leadership, there's a chance that Mexico would be in control of Southern California today. However, at the end of the day, the Mexican-American War comes to a close with America signing the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848. This gave them Texas all the way down to the Rio Grande, California, and New Mexico. New Mexico then was just New Mexico, but now it's the current states of Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. 5 years later, the final lower boundary of the 48 states was established with President Pierce's Gadsden Purchase. That concludes the absolute wild tale of the Mexican-American War. I hope you learned something, and remember, don't mess with Texas.